The Business of Art, brought to you by the Video Department.
We spent so much time, like I probably missed the heyday of The Office while it was on. You know, all these like network cable shows that were like, we always had rehearsal. Like when things were on network TV, you're like, I had rehearsal. I missed everything.
Oh yeah, that definitely was.
Like in the mid 2000s to like 2014, whatever. People would be like, did you see this or did you see that? I'm like, I missed it. I missed that.
And that was definitely something that I think everyone got a dose of in 2020. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
It was like, oh, now all we can do is watch
TV. And now, now what I did was, I'm probably one of these people who has every subscription to every streaming platform. I have like YouTube TV, cable. I have the NFL Direct TV package, so I can watch every game.
Are you saying YouTube TV plus cable or YouTube TV cable?
YouTube TV is the cable.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
So, but I have like the Direct TV package with the full football game, like every NFL game.
So you have Direct TV. Was there drama with you recently in ESPN?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't even know what they're.
Okay.
I don't even know what was going on.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Was there like where they were like friction with licensing and stuff?
Yeah, I need to pull it up because it's actually kind of amazing. So I walked into my gym and and this was on the TV. It said, "Our contract with," this is DirecTV, "Our contract with Disney, the owner of this channel, has expired. So no ESPN on the TV." And then I walk in like a week later, and this is what it says. "Disney is blocking you from sports, entertainment, and kids and family channels while DirecTV works to reach a new agreement." I know, that's exactly what I said. They're bringing out the clause.
Wow. Saucer of milk for DirecTV. Holy crap.
I know.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that was happening.
The drama.
Yeah. I just remember having 3 channels. I remember having 3 channels, and whatever was on was what was on, and like whatever. And I would watch the news on NBC with John Chancellor before Tom Brokaw with my dad, and like we would talk about the world. And I remember they talked about like nuclear war on the news in like 1982, and I was like, "Dad, what's nuclear war?" And my dad he's like, "Well, if Mr. Reagan and Mr. Andropov can't get their act together, then you and I just won't be here anymore." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? Where will we go?" He goes, "You and I just won't be here anymore." So then he's like, "Good night," and then the light goes off, and you just blinking in the dark, like what the. But this whole like media ecosystem and not being able to watch, like my dad gave me like a strict bedtime. I had like at 8:30 for the longest time. And so I couldn't even watch full programs. I'd watch like half of the A-Team and get to like, the second act, whatever, like right before like the third act turn or something. And I wouldn't know what happened.
Yeah. What's happening?
What's happening? What thing are they going to put together?
So intense.
What thing are they going to put? They were like 4 MacGyvers.
Right,
they put something together to fight the guy who's taking the local farmer and like extorting money from him or something like that. But I never could watch any of it. And then my dad gave me like a half an hour to play with, where he'd be like, 1 day a week, you can stay up till 9. So I remember I was like, okay, I'm going to use this half hour to watch The Greatest American Hero, which was like my favorite show. And the night, I think it was the night that I was going to use my half hour to watch the full episode of The Greatest American Hero, some guy threatened to blow up the Washington Monument, and ABC went right to that. And they cut away. They cut away from The Greatest American Hero. So I'm like, man, but so just because of this like feeling of media scarcity, I always feel like when I turn the TV on, something I want to watch is on. I always feel like I get the sugar rush.
Yeah.
Of like I wasn't deprived in any way, shape, or form, but I always feel like, oh my God, I get to watch that.
Yeah.
I get to watch. Oh my God. And now we live in a media ecosystem where I'll literally flip the channels, and if there'll be like 4 different Spider-Man movies that I'm flipping past.
With at least 3 different actors.
With like 3 different actors. A bunch of Star Wars movies I may have seen a bunch.
Yeah.
And I just want to call myself at age 9 and be like, not only do the Patriots have 6 Super Bowls, not only, are the Red Sox perpetually good, but like anything you can possibly imagine that you loved as a kid is like now is in corporeal form in some movie somewhere, and it's like an amazingly rich media ecosystem that we live in. There's just too many now to a certain point with the streaming. It feels like
it's too rich.
It feels like homework.
It's like a soup that's just too. There's something about it that's too
like,
much.
Man, there's too much.
I can't really have too much of this.
There's too much, and people will say, "Oh my God!" The conversations that people have, because when you're married now, you make decisions about what you watch together.
Yeah.
So you're like, "Well, we watch Better Call Saul, or we watch, we're watching this right now."
Yeah.
And so
that's the phrase.
The sort of infidelity that exists in 2024 is like going and watching one episode ahead of without your significant other. That's like unforgivable. So yeah. But you also have to decide like what are you going to watch,
right?
Because my wife and I have this sort of deal where if like she's going to watch sports or if she's going to watch a Marvel movie or like all the Lord of the Rings films, like I have to rub her feet. So she'll settle in for the foot rub, and I will literally give myself arthritis, until Frodo and Sam get to Mordor.
Gosh, if you're doing the director's cuts of Lord of the Rings, man, you're
yeah,
in for
the
it.
extended editions, and my hands are like, I'm like, she likes it. She likes it. Yeah.
That was Scott Wichmann as Gollum. Just so that's the best intro we've ever had on the pod.
Loves it.
Well, thank you for being here, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
We've already talked about so much. We've gotten into some sort of deep media territory.
Yeah.
But one thing that I love to do in the pod is I love for our audience to hear sort of where you came from. So bring us back to however early you want to.
Yeah. I'm one of these kids from the 70s, born in 73. My parents split up when I was about 4 years old. My biological father was in the Army. We were in Hawaii when my parents split up. And then my mom came back to Massachusetts. Well, I think we had nothing but like the clothes on our backs. Like we were dressed for Hawaii.
Wow, what a change.
Yeah, so when we came back to Massachusetts, we had like literally my grandparents had to bring coats to the airport. So she fled a really bad situation, and then she got remarried, and my stepdad took over the role, and that's where I got my last name. Otherwise, my name would be Scott Michael Jackson. So I'm Scott Michael Wichmann now because my dad, Ted Wichmann, stepped up, and I was just like most performers. There's that rambunctiousness where you're just absorbing stuff from media and TV and spitting it back out, and just super enthusiastic about storytelling, and you're getting the whole, he's got a lot of energy for class, that if we can just find an outlet for him and stuff. So we moved around a lot as a kid. I was in Pennsylvania. We were in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I took an acting class, and I was like the only boy in the class, and I wanted to go out and do other things. But this woman who ran the class her name was Rita Julius, and
great name. She
had this like really gruff, like smoky voice where she had probably smoked, she probably ran through, like Bill Hicks would say, she ran through 2 lighters a day. So she was like,
she was in the cast of Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
She's in the waiting room.
She was like, but she was wonderful, and she was great. And then when the class was over, about a year later, we lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania at the time, and the director of Scranton Public Theater was Jason Miller, who was the actor from The Exorcist who played Father Karras.
Okay, yeah.
The guy who gets thrown out the window at the end of the film. He makes this heroic sacrifice. And he was directing a play called 1,000 Clowns, and 1,000 Clowns needs a 11, 12-year-old boy. So I auditioned for the role, and I got it.
This is in Scranton?
This is in Scranton. And I was maybe in like 8th grade. And so that was kind of like, everybody kind of catches the bug at a certain time. But that was like the point at which I realized, there are adults who do this, who take this storytelling seriously. And I thought, well, I want to be one of those. And then
it's an important moment for a young person.
Yeah, and like whatever it is, like when people are telling you, hey, I think you could do this, and they're adults and they're encouraging, that's a really important moment. And so I had that really early with somebody who was really had done some great things in the film and in theater. He'd written the Pulitzer Prize for that championship season. Great play, 1973, won all these Tony Awards and the Pulitzer Prize. So
is that the name of a play, that championship
yeah,
season?
that's a great play that Jason Miller wrote. And so if you think about 73, I was born that year. He won the Pulitzer Prize for that championship season, and he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for The Exorcist. Like, that's one heck of a year. But that play is phenomenal. It's about these four members of a 5-member state championship basketball team who have this reunion with their coach, who is like himself a force of nature, and they have to reckon with their lives as middle-aged men against sort of the promise of what they were when they won that state title. So it's a really incredible piece, and I've always wanted to do it.
Yeah, that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's great. But
I was just looking up Hoosiers yesterday.
I love
just
Hoosiers.
Ironically. I mean, I know it's not the same story, but
Yeah.
it's, obviously about a high school basketball team. So yeah,
I love Hoosiers. The only, like, one of my things, if I ever won like hundreds of millions of dollars in the lottery, you would see like Wichmann lottery winner buys film Hoosiers, and then commissions classic orchestral soundtrack. Because the only thing that I don't really like about that movie is that that soundtrack is a little too 80s for
like
its
80 cent. I don't remember.
for its like
Yeah.
50 for its like it has this like 80s sensitivity with this like 50s 60s storyline. So I just wish there was like a more sweeping orchestral score. But these are the things I think about in my quiet moments.
No, yeah.
But yeah, but I mean, I roundabout. I went to Wagner College, Staten Island, New York, and
You're all over the place.
yeah, it was like
the Northeast.
I landed in Richmond because I was working at FAO Schwartz, as a toy demonstrator,
Of course.
in like '97, and somebody said, "Hey, there's auditions for Busch Gardens, Williamsburg," and my lease was coming due for renewal, and I was like, I need to get out of New York for a year. So I went down to Busch Gardens and I did the Enchanted Laboratory show.
Yeah. Oh, you'd be great for that show.
I did that 2,212 times
In 1 year?
from 97 to 98.
Gotcha.
I was like the Cal Ripken of Northrop's of that show. That was the show with the Enchanted Laboratory where the Sorcerer's Apprentice turns iron into gold. And I had seen that show like 3 years in a row on 3 different trips to Virginia. Way down in Virginia, so far away from where we lived. And next thing you know, I was in Virginia and I met all these people. So some people who'd worked at Busch Gardens had worked at the Lost Colony and had worked at Theater 4 as touring actors. So this is like employment triangle that existed where people that worked at all these different places would then sort of recommend, hey, you should go to Richmond to work for Theater 4. So I landed in Richmond working for Theater 4. And I eventually landed at the Lost Colony as well.
Yeah, talk to me about the Lost Colony. It's the second time it's come up on the pod.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Who else mentioned
it? Wasn't someone, I think Spivey and I talked about it, but he didn't go there. He went to a different
his sister was
stock.
his sister was there when I was there, so he went there to visit. So,
I actually think we talked
yeah,
about it.
so like the thing about the Lost Colony is, like, I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about the Lost Colony. I was back after Busch Gardens, I went back to Massachusetts. I was substitute teaching and working at O'Connell's Convenience Plus, which is a like 7-Eleven style gas station that sells like lottery tickets, milk, and cold cuts.
This is in Williamsburg?
This was in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay,
so this is like after I went back to Massachusetts.
After Busch Gardens.
And so I'm literally like substitute teaching 8th graders and then working my shift at O'Connell's after school. And cutting like half pound of olive loaf. People would be like, can I have half a pound of ham, half a pound of cheese, a carton of Marlboros, a bunch of scratch tickets, and like a gallon of milk? And that was like Pittsfield, you know? So I was like, oh my God, I got to get back. I got to get out of here again. I just don't know where I'm going to go. And this director that I had at Wagner College, his name was Drew Scott Harris. He was very sort of erudite sounding. And he said, Scott, I'm taking over as the artistic director of the Lost Colony down in Manteo, North Carolina. Do you know anything about it? I'm like, I don't know anything about that. And apparently it was where the one of the first expeditions to the New World disappeared. These people just magically sort of vanished after carving the word Croatoan into the side of a tree. They just disappeared in like 1587 or something like that. So there was this role called Old Tom. There's this character who is part of the expedition, but he's kind of like the clown of the show. Mm-hmm. He's normally played by an older guy. Well, Drew had asked me, and I was like maybe 26, to come down and play Old Tom in the Lost Colony. So I went down to New York and auditioned for it. He cast me right on the street corner. He offered me the job right on the street corner. So I was like, okay. And he literally said, it'll be a fun show, and you can come down to the beach and drink beer and chase women or do whatever you do. That's literally what he said. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a great idea. So, and the character, Old Tom, in the show, The Lost Colony, has a real drinking problem. Oh, man, he can't get out of his own way. And by the end of the show, by the end of the narrative, he becomes one of the people who is sort of leading the colony in a new direction. So he, at a certain point, he gives up the booze and he grabs a weapon and is standing a post, which is a really interesting thing because at that point in my life, I was, let's say the party didn't stop. As soon as rehearsal was over or a performance was over, like I was reaching for the first in the 12-pack that I was about to knock down. And so, and life there at the colony is like that. I mean, it's there's a lot of work that goes involved, but there's also a lot of play, and
it's known more for the play.
Yeah. But but the interesting thing is that there, like when I was there, relationships would forge. People, friends of mine would find each other, get married.
I'm sure.
There's a real tie to all these people who have done who've like been at the colony.
It's like people who've done hair. It's a tribe.
You're like, it is a tribe, and you're like, oh my God. So like, of course. So I did it for 2 years and absolutely loved it, and will never forget and probably never remember some of the escapades.
Is it like 3-month contract?
Yeah, it's like I think we started rehearsals in May, and then it was over like the last week in August, which is like around the time where like my birthday lands on August 30th. So it was like we would leave, but like I left 1 year. I think it was it 98? I left and I didn't know sort of what was next. So I finished out the last 2 months of the contract at Busch Gardens as Northrop again. So I came to Richmond, and then my buddy Rick St. Peter cast me at Virginia Union in a production of Tartuffe, and then I fell into a job with Theater 4 just driving the touring van. So that was back when they had enough money in the budget to have a cast of like 5 or 6 people, and then have somebody to drive the van, to be a school liaison person to sort of like help set up the sound equipment, make sure the lights were squared away. And that was my first job.
Wow.
Ford asked me if I could drive the van. He's like, you have a driver's license, youngster? And I was like, yeah, I do. He's like, great. So I ended up driving the van for Theater 4 for Virginia Rep for like the first 2 months of my time in Richmond. And then I ended up in their touring shows. But then next thing you know, like I kept working with them and got my union card, and I was like, does it make sense to have this card in this community? And I just kept working.
Talk about that,
man. I mean,
how did you get it?
So I did. So it was ties in with 2001.
The Space Odyssey.
Yes, Space. I can't do that, Dave. 2001, the Barksdale Theater hit a financial iceberg. Virginia Rep at the time, Theater 4, Bruce and Phil, took over and like basically consolidated theaters. They took over Barksdale and kept it afloat financially and prevented it from going under. And so eventually both those theaters would be under the umbrella of Virginia Rep. This was when Barksdale was at the Willow Lawn space. Which
was Hanover Tavern operating at that time?
Hanover Tavern was not operational until like 2003 maybe.
Okay.
they did a production of like Barefoot in the Park to inaugurate that again. But
Tony Foley.
Yeah, Tony Foley.
Molly
and
Hood.
Molly Hood. Like, respect. But like, but they obviously wanted to keep a low overhead, right? So it made sense for them to do a solo show. So they did this show called Fully Committed, where one actor essentially plays the role of Sam, who is a beleaguered restaurant reservation line taker at this really ritzy, trendy Manhattan restaurant. And the actor plays 42 characters, including, that main character. He plays his dad and all these different people. And they offered me my equity card for doing this show. And it was around Christmas time, 2001. And it was a hit. And so then next thing you know, I had my equity card.
How old are you?
At that time, I was 28 years old, had my equity card, and I was like, what, do I stick around? And Bruce and Phil were like, just keep auditioning for things. And this sort of kicked off this run from probably about like 2001 to 2009, like unabated, of just doing show after show after show after show after show after show after show at Virginia Rep. And I was like gainfully employed. And then I started doing shows at the Firehouse and different places. And like, it was like its own laboratory. It was almost like you were in a repertory company.
Right.
Because you're just going from one show to the next. And I was able to, for a certain period of time, know sort of what shows I was going to be doing during the course of a year, which is not a luxury that an actor has. But during that course of time, there came with it a sense of notoriety. Like, I would run into people in the grocery store who'd be like, oh, I saw you in this show, or I saw you in that show. And you'd building sort of an audience because of the opportunity that you've gotten to highlight, to headline some of these shows. And so that is kind of where that came from. And it was an opportunity that a lot of people that I went to school with or went to, that were in larger markets were like, what are you doing? And I was actually living a rich, fulfilling artistic life because I was doing what I loved where I lived. And, I was getting like health insurance weeks and getting, money towards my pension, which is probably going to be a meager AEA pension, but it's still there. And like, so I'll always be indebted to Bruce and Phil for like giving me that opportunity and getting the opportunity to like work in this like incredibly immersive theater lab where you're doing all these incredible shows with all these wonderful people. And it was awesome. I mean, to look back at the show history, it's insane. So,
are you still AEA?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So did a special appearance contract with the Firehouse to do Black Stash and Peter and the Starcatcher. So I still got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you did Virginia Stage Company, when you did Fiddler?
Yep. When I did Fiddler and when I did Three Musketeers.
Oh yeah, how was that?
It was awesome, man. Like, they're a great company.
Yeah.
I mean, did you work with them before?
Never worked with them, but I've seen many productions.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And I did something with Virginia Musical Theater, did Catch Me If You Can.
Yes.
Love them. And so being down in Norfolk has just sort of expanded the scope of opportunity and the increased the awareness of like where these wonderful places that there are to work. Like the Wells Theater down in Virginia Stage Company is like incredible.
I mean, it's as good as it gets.
Yeah,
it really is.
Tom Quaintance, who's the artistic director down there, when he did the sort of welcome, I think for the Fiddler cast, he was like, our theater was built in like 1913 and it's incredible and it has 3 ghosts and like, he just rattles that off. I'm like, whoa, back up.
What did he say?
He said there was like, he's like, one is like the ghost of a sailor that worked in the wings. That like, that a lot of stagehands used to be sailors and because they knew all the knots and everything.
Yeah,
that's why you're not supposed to whistle backstage. That's, and then there's one that's like supposed to be like the ghost of a young girl or something, and then another one I don't know, I forget.
So what point along the way did you start getting film work, and did you get like representation in that way, and how?
I started doing some commercials in town There was one that I did in like 2005 for American Family Fitness,
Yes.
where like this
Iconic.
this guy is like trying to do a pull up, and he's trying to eke out one pull up, and this beautiful woman steps into the foreground and she starts stretching, and he ekes out like one pull up, and then he says like 38, and that was, you know, Eva and I were at Stella's a couple of years ago having dinner, and these guys were. It was near closing time. These guys had had a lot to drink, and they were at the like right at the corner of the bar, right behind me, and they were talking about that ad with such a love. Like when you talk about stuff from your childhood,
Didn't recognize you. You just heard.
No,
them?
I wasn't looking. And Eva kept saying, "I wanna. Oh my God, I want to tell him it's you." And I was like, I just want to sit and listen. These guys were, and they were loving it. And I was working on that with a guy named Ty Williams, who sadly is no longer with us. He passed away way too young, but he had such a sly, fun sense of humor. So I started, and even before that, I worked on a commercial for a Virginia Henrico Golf Open with the Henry brothers, Mike Henry and his brother Patrick Henry.
Okay.
They worked on Family Guy. Mike was the voice. Voice of Cleveland, right? Yeah. And Patrick was a producer. And the show had gotten canceled after 3 seasons. Family Guy got canceled. Mm-hmm. So they came back to Richmond, but I didn't know them from Adam. I had no idea. And I was talking with Patrick. I was in on this commercial set, and I was like, I thought, oh man, I'm going to network with these new guys. Like they had been in Richmond for like years.
Right. Yeah.
And I said to Patrick, I was like, are you guys new in town? And he's like, no. He's like, we went away for a couple of years to do a show. What show? Oh, it's called Family Guy. I'm like, oh my God, I love Family Guy. So it did some commercial work with some like relatively wonderfully notable folks who were working at a high level. Eventually, Family Guy got, picked up again.
Right.
And
then had spinoffs.
Yeah, and spinoffs like the Cleveland show. Yeah. So, but I don't think I was in any theatrical features. And I remember 2010, it was around 2010. For a while there, I drove a scooter around town.
Okay.
So I drove this little scooter, right? So
I think we can all see that.
Yeah. So I got this little scooter, and I'm driving it around because it's cheap to fill up. I'm like, this is like, you can park the doggone thing
Richmond's
anywhere.
a perfect city for a scooter.
Richmond was like a perfect city for a scooter. So I'm filling this thing up for like $1.25. There was a business, Chelsea Lammers had a business called Scoot Richmond, which was down in like Manchester area.
Okay. Yeah.
And I bought this like scooter offer for like $2,000, and I got it insured, right? So I had insurance on this scooter, and it got stolen. Despite all my best efforts, it got stolen from right out in front of my apartment. We lived in an apartment on Monument, and it got stolen. So I filed a claim. So the guy calls me or whatever from the State Farm office in Charlottesville and is like, "We've got a check for like $2,000 for you, right?" I also got a call from Erica Arvold, who's a casting director in Richmond, and I had done a couple of like VCU film shorts, but not really spent a whole lot of time in the film world. Every time I step foot on a set, I still feel like a theater person stepping into a set, and it's just like, it's still sort of foreign and exciting and nerve-wracking. At
this point, you probably always will, because you have so much theater experience.
Yeah, I have so much theater experience. Yeah. I got the bank account to show for it too. Yeah. They say the only way to make a little money in the theater is to start out with a lot of money. But so I step into this audition situation for this Hallmark movie that they're shooting in Smith Mountain Lake with all these incredible people. Like Jane Seymour is going to be the lead,
cool.
Right? And it's called Lake Effects, and it's one of those Hallmark romance stories. High powered attorney type goes back to her hometown and like falls for the local guy. It was like perfect.
It's like Sweet Home Alabama.
Right, exactly, kind of like that. So I go to this callback, and it's going to be in Charlottesville. And it's on the day that I'm supposed to pick up this $2,000 check from the State Farm office in Charlottesville. So
that's also in Charlottesville?
Yeah. So it was like the same location. It's this giant compound. Like it's got like bulletproof glass and stuff, ostensibly because, they don't want some disgruntled person who didn't get the payout they think they deserve to come in and, cause havoc.
Yikes.
So it's literally like they have to buzz you in. You go through like, and you get the check and everything. You have to sign for it. And so anyway, it's like there's this mindset that goes with auditioning where it's like, auditioning is sometimes it's like dating. Like if you bring way too much pressure to the situation, like it's just not, there's nothing alluring about you. If you're like, please like me, please approve of me, is a different energy from like carefree, I'm here to play and see what happens and interact with you with a real sense of spontaneity and creativity. Like that's different. That's there's like something possible versus this kind of like small, needy, you just reek of desperation, right? Now, if you know that you're going to get a $2,000 check in about an hour, not only are you looking at the clock, but you're also a little bit, that's where your focus is. Your focus is like, I got a check waiting for me, right? So I'm already happy. So I'm in the audition room with like, these, we played these knuckleheads that were called the Smithy Society. They were basically these guys who believed that there was a lake monster in Smith Mountain Lake.
There is.
And we were the comic relief of this piece. So I'm in this audition situation, but I'm knowing that like I'm going to get paid here, and like, and I'm looking at the clock because I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to get out of here at like. But they liked us in the room, and there was a sense of freedom, and I was just happy because I was going to get some money, which we're just not used to in the theater, right? Like, so I had this fun sensibility. I remember I like in the audition room, I like backed up and accidentally hit the light switch on the wall, and the light went off, and we all freaked out. And then I realized what I had done, and it was this fun moment that like, if I was all guarded and nervous and like, it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And I actually had to say to them at a certain point, I was like, I'd love to read more. I said, but unless you're going to put $2,000 in my hand right now, I got to go, cause I got to get this check. And they were like, oh, go. And there's this sense of, you've heard other people talk about auditions, and whether they be on film or whether they're theater auditions, but like that idea of like your job is to audition, and your job is to try and be as sort of relaxed and open as you as possible. And like if you can bring that sort of freedom to it, like all this stuff opens up that you just couldn't possibly predict. And so it also takes the pressure off you. Like sometimes I would do voiceover auditions for In Your Ear, and I would find myself noticing that if Kathy Allsbrook, who manages that office incredibly well, like she's so like such a pro, but I've eventually had to stop saying, Kathy, don't tell me how much this job might pay out, because I will grip the bat really tight if I think. Just say, hey, this is a thing, and it's for we're trying to sell this or that, and just send me the copy. We'll worry about the numbers later on. But if I think I'm holding on to a lottery ticket,
right,
I'm not thinking about like, I'm just putting all this pressure on myself. And so the less pressure you can put on yourself about like, oh man, this audition is gonna make or break me, and so I did some film stuff with Erica Arvold and Ann Chapman, and then eventually I got cast in Lincoln, which was incredible. Like
was that through Erica?
That was through Erica, and in fact,
and you got lake effects.
I got lake effects,
yeah.
And I got to work with like Jane Seymour, and she was, when I was a kid, I saw her.
Dr. Quinn.
Yeah, well, even before that, like in the 70s, she was in Battlestar Galactica when she was like, and so even to my 6-year-old, I'm like, gee whiz, she's swell, and she, she's a pro too, man. She was an example of someone who's always hustling, because at the time she had her Jane Seymour like jewelry collection, and she was hustling to sell that on the set. I mean, she was like, so you're like always working, because this business is not gonna. There's nothing promised to anybody. No. You're not. You have to save your pennies for a rainy day. You have to like. But you've also got to like not tie your self-worth so closely to something, so that if you don't get it, you can just walk away and go, my life is full enough that I, if I never work in show business again, I still am really fulfilled and driven. If nobody ever casts me for anything, I still wake up in the morning and like excited about life. And you have to have that, because there's just no guarantee. I don't know.
What was it? What was the process for Lincoln getting it and working with, a pretty good
Holy
director?
Mackerel. So at the time, I was working on active duty for training orders at the Naval Operations Support Center in Richmond. So I was getting up in the morning and like going to, at the time it was NOS, now it's NRC Richmond, and I was working in their logistics department. And the day is generally was like 7:07 to like 1600, which is 4:00. So I get this call from Erica Arvold, and they're like, "Hey, can we see you at like 3:30 down in Shockoe Bottom to read for this?" Everyone was calling it something like high-profile Civil War film. Like everybody knew what it was. Everybody knew.
That's
it was
funny.
like the worst kept secret in town. And I'm like, this is that Lincoln movie that Steven Spielberg is shooting. Oh my God. So I got there, and
This was same day.
same day, they asked me, and I remember I had to ask Chief Dupree, ITC, I forget his first name. I had to ask him, the chief down there. I was like, "Chief, can I explain to you what's going on? Like, I'm also an actor, and there's this movie, and they want to." And he was like, "Well, I'll tell you what. I was a logistics specialist, second class at the time." He was like, "When you get that role, that big Hollywood money, and you make out that check to ITC Dupree," and he was like, "Go on, do your best." So I showed up there with my uniform top. Like I had to take the uniform top, they call it a blouse. I had to take the blouse off, and I was like in my blue T-shirt, and they gave you like a dummy script. Not because I was a dummy, but because it was like
Didn't hurt.
didn't hurt. Nailed it. But like, they give you a dummy script, which is basically like, a scene or lines that are not in the film, or you're not necessarily reading for the character that. So, I read this like little monologue or this little scene, and with a movie that big, you're thinking there ain't no way I'm going to be ever involved in any of this. This is so big and so so high stakes and so gigantic that there's not going to be room for little me in it.
And you don't even know what you're auditioning
I don't even
for.
know what. Yeah, I don't know what role. I'd read the book, Team of Rivals, because I actually wrote a thing about Frederick Douglass and Honest Abe for Virginia Rep as a touring show. So like in 2007, I had read this book that the movie's based on, and it was this incredible moment where I was kind of prepared,
Yeah.
So I read really well, and about a week goes by, or maybe it was a week, a couple days go by, and I got a call from Ann Chapman, and I was in the parking lot of a toy store. There was a guy that I worked with in the Navy who was moonlighting as like the manager of like a KB toy store in like Chesterfield. So because he had kids and he had a second job.
Gotcha.
So he's like, "I need to go pick up my check. Come with me, and then we'll go to lunch." And I get this phone call standing in the parking lot, and Anna's like, she's probably making 50 calls to different actors, and so to her, she's just rattling this stuff off. But she says, "Steven really enjoyed your read, and he thinks you're really dynamic, and he wants to use you, but he's not sure in what role." And I was like, "Could you say that again, slower, Ann?" She was like, "Steven loved your video, loved your read, thinks you're really dynamic, and he's not sure." And I'm like, "Steven, when we say Steven, do we mean Steven?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." And so I basically kind of sent my vital statistics or whatever to A.V. Kaufman's office in New York City, and then I just kind of waited. And then at a certain point, like I didn't really hear much else for like a month and a half, so I thought, I'm not.
Had they already started filming or no?
They hadn't started filming yet, but they cast me as Charles Benjamin, who's the like assistant to the Secretary of War.
Anne called you for that?
What?
Did Anne call you for that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I got a call from Ian Stone. Ian Stone he was like the first AD, and he sounded very much like this. Mm-hmm. And then the second AD was this guy named Adam, who kind of sounded like this. So they were like polar opposites. But Ian was just very measured and very polished, and he asked me to come in to it was the AMF Bowling Center that they then used it for the Turn production office. And it's, so I went down there, and like I didn't even know who I was playing. they just wanted to like fit me for a costume and have me fill out all my paperwork and stuff. And so I did that, and they were like just about to like release me, and Ian goes, "Well, wait a minute, Scott, did you want to read your scene?" And I was like, "Sure. Yeah, that'd be great." So he hands me this binder, and it's like a for your eyes only situation, and
you have to wear white gloves.
Yeah, you have to like they bring me into a room, and in this room is every headshot of every actor in the production, and it starts with like Sally Field and Daniel Day-Lewis, and it goes all the way down, and like Lucas Haas from Witness he's in the very beginning of the film, like every Tommy Lee Jones, like all these people that you've spent time seeing as a kid, like growing up watching them in these films, and there's your little headshot like toward the back, and you're like, oh my god, I'm on the wall, I made it on the wall. And then I'm reading the thing, and there's a scene where they're waiting in the War Department for the word as to whether or not we've won the Battle of Fort Fisher, because that was a major turning point in the war that people don't really realize. And I get to deliver the news that Fort Fisher is ours. We've taken the port. And I literally have those lines. And I'm sitting there reading this binder, and it says Charles Benjamin, and it's got lines. And I kind of, like, no one's looking at me. I'm just sitting in the corner reading this binder. But I look up, and I just kind of have this religious experience where I'm like, oh my God, I have one line in a Spielberg movie. And it was like the whole thing, like I was glowing. I just handed back this script to this guy, like, and I drove home like so grateful. And then I also thought, like, just enjoy that for a minute and don't try to undermine it with some kind of like neurotic whatever. Just like let it be what it is. And so I said I was going to do one day on the movie, and I said, gosh, I'd like to get a ball cap for Steven Spielberg, because every time I've seen him in a documentary, he wears these like ball caps, baseball caps. A lot of times he'll wear they're sort of like, we call them scrambled eggs. Yeah. Like commanding officers in the Navy will wear like the gold leafing on the brim. Well, we had a Navy Reserve Center, a Naval Operations Support Center, Richmond ball cap. They were $10, and you could get one. So I dropped $10 and got one with the gold leafing on it. And I said to the AD, I was like, can I just give this, or can I give it to someone to give to Steven Spielberg? Because every time I see him, he's wearing a cap. And they were like, oh, yeah, no problem. So I show up on the day of filming, and of course, you're in a trailer. There's a fruit basket with your welcome to Virginia, even though I'm already from here. But it's like it was from Steve and Kathy and all of us here at DreamWorks, and like, it was just phenomenal. And so I'm sitting with Adam Driver and Bruce McGill, and of course Adam Driver is not Adam Driver yet. He's been in Girls though, hasn't he? He's been in Girls, but I guess it hasn't. I don't know if it had hit the big time yet. Yeah. But he's just very quiet, and I didn't know he was a Marine either at the time. Like, I would find out later that like he was a Marine, and that he had founded Arts in the Armed Forces, an organization that brings plays and basically would bring arts to military families around the world in deployed locations and stuff. So I get there, and we all are sort of standing in a semicircle waiting to meet Steven Spielberg, and he was just so nice. Now, rewind to 1989. I'm a Boy Scout with Troop 98 in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and we go all the way to Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia to be part of the 89 Jamboree, where Steven Spielberg is presenting the very first cinematography merit badge, and he's inaugurating this merit badge program, and he's there at the opening ceremonies with a laser light show and Lee Greenwood singing God Bless the USA before the Gulf War sort of like, drilled that into everybody's head. It wasn't such a sort of jingoistic, Cracker Barrel totem at the time. It was like one of the greatest moments of my entire life. And now flash back to, like we're back in 2011 filming this movie, and I'm shaking Steven Spielberg's hand. Mike Scoutmaster wouldn't let me break away from the group to take his little class, because he's like, Mr. Gilbert was like, we do everything as a troop. And so the first half of filming is great. And I still am pinching myself the whole time. And I'm just trying to stay relaxed. And I'm sitting right next to Daniel Day-Lewis, who is not Daniel Day-Lewis. He's Abraham Lincoln. And like he sits down next to me. Well, first of all, he comes around the corner onto the set with this shawl over himself. And he looks like, I don't know what it's like to see a ghost. Like, I don't know what it physiologically does to people who
Didn't see that one at the Wells?
No, I haven't seen one yet. But I always imagine, like, what would that feel for someone to see an apparition or something, right? That charge that would go through your body where you're like, I can't process what I'm seeing right now. He came around the corner as Abraham Lincoln, and I had probably what is the closest physiological response to seeing a ghost. It was like, that cannot be. He was so indelibly Abraham Lincoln. And he sits down next to me and he's reading this book. I don't know what the book is, but he says to me, good morning. And I said, good morning, Mr. President. And he said, if I fall asleep, just go ahead and kick my chair. I said, will do, sir. You know, I'm so used to, sir, yes, sir, in the Navy. And so we get to lunchtime and I'm like, wanting to write like my own Civil War letter, like, dearest mother, I write to you on the first day of the filming for Lincoln. And,
Have you done your line yet?
I haven't done my line yet. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to, and part of me is like, oh, they're going to cut my line or, so they're going to give it to Adam Driver's going to say it or whatever. So I'm just about ready to go back on the set. And Ian Stone, the first AD, stops me and says, Scott, you wanted to give Steven a ball cap or something. I said, oh, yeah, I got the Navy Operations Support Center ball cap right here in my bag. I can just tell me who to give it to, and I can. He said, well, just go out and wait in front of this trailer over here. And I said, okay. So I go out, and he's like, this is Deb, she's our publicist, and this is Michael, our set photographer, and Steven will be out in a couple of moments.
I see where this is going.
And they'll talk about never meet your heroes, right? Whoever said that has the wrong heroes. Because this guy, in the middle of the machinery of this billion-dollar enterprise, spent like, maybe it was 7 minutes, maybe it was 10 minutes with me, and I gave him this ball cap, and we took a couple pictures, and he was so gracious, and I mean, I basically thanked him on behalf of our whole generation for always having a story teed up for us, like a little gift, right? Like every year it seemed like he was going, here's another, whether it's Indiana Jones or E.T. or Amazing Stories or something that he had his hands in, he was giving us a gift of storytelling. And I just thanked him. And it seemed like that landed profoundly. And I told him about Fort A.P. Hill and the Boy Scout Jamboree and Mr. Gilbert not letting me go. And he said, that makes you about 37, 38. Like he did the math like immediately. And I was 38 years old at the time. And we were Boy Scouts. And, I had to confess that I didn't make Eagle because I discovered girls and I stopped going. He was like, well, girls didn't discover me, so I made Eagle, which I thought was very funny. But then he asked me what I was going to be doing because I would be deployed to Afghanistan in February. And he said, well, all your boots on the ground buddies will get to see you in the movie. And I thought, I just walked away like, holy mackerel. And we ended up having to do another day on the film. And I was supposed to go to Battle Creek, Michigan for pre-deployment training. And my senior chief, Maisa Maiore, senior chief logistics specialist, Maisa Maiore, made arrangements to change my travel so I didn't have to be there. And basically I got to do a second day on the film. And she took notes for me, this pre-deployment notes that she went over with me on the weekend. I went to Battle Creek on Friday, and she spent her whole weekend, going over the notes she took from the first week of the class so I could be in this movie. And it is just, and I'm going to get emotional because I came back from overseas and the movie came out after I got back from Afghanistan, and my stepmother said that my dad and her went to see the film at the Berkshire Mall in Lanesboro, Massachusetts. And my father, who was a very quiet, reserved guy, especially especially in public situations. She said that when my face showed up 10 feet tall in the movie theater, my father stood up and said, "That's my son." And Steven Spielberg went on to do amazing things and told some incredible stories. But like that little gift that he gave to my dad was just a profound, I was just always really been very appreciative of him for that opportunity and the time he gave in the middle of this huge enterprise to just share a moment. And it was excellent. The whole family still talks about it. And so my aunt, we got these set photographs and I gave them to people in my family and people who were very supportive of me. I gave them to them as Christmas presents. And so it was me and Steven Spielberg. And my aunt sent it to my Uncle Michael. And since he was wearing the ball cap with the Naval Operations Support Center on it, she said, "Mike, did you get the picture?" And she's like, "Isn't that amazing?" He goes, "What? Oh, the picture of Scott was some damn Navy guy." He didn't know who Steven Spielberg was. He didn't know who he, couldn't pick him out of a lineup. But things like that when you watch a film or you watch a piece of artwork, you don't know the little moments that go into it. And they all meant something to every person who worked on that film that had a tiny little sliver of a moment in that movie. And the fact that he brought that story to Richmond, to the Richmond community, the first time I saw the movie, all I did was we just picked out people. I'm like, oh my God, it's, John Moon has this incredible part in the film, and then what it does to you in terms of knowing that you've worked with somebody who does what they do at an incredibly high level and that you could, that you were part of that, that's incredible. So, I mean, if you can get over the nerves of being in sort of the Yankee Stadium of sets, you can work anywhere.
How did it go when you actually had to do your line?
So the line was actually Fort Fisher is ours. Fort Fisher ''S. Fort Fisher's ours. We've taken the port. So it's kind of, I'm walking around for a month before the shoot. I'm just walking around my apartment going, Fort Fisher's ours. We've taken the port. Fort Fisher's ours. And of course, in the film, I'm the smallest guy in that little clump of incredibly accomplished actors. And Adam Driver writes on the telegram and he hands it to me and the camera pushes in from on this track and I say, Fort Fisher's ours. We've taken the port. And they're like, cut. He's like, we did it twice. He said, will you say is ours? Just just change the apostrophe to Fort Fisher is ours. I said, okay. Yes, sir. And I was like, don't do anything with this line. Just report it like you would report something to your commanding officer. You are not the focus of this scene. Fort Fisher is ours. I'm like, how do you, and the other thing is that,
and you hadn't auditioned for this.
I didn't audition saying this role. I said this monologue. So, but it's still, and then he also grabbed a moment where, Daniel Day-Lewis diffuses the tension of a situation by telling one of his fun stories about Ethan Allen. But his introduction to that scene is him saying from off camera, he goes, "Come on out, you old rat." And everybody turns to look at him. And I was sitting right next to him. So when I look at him, I throw this eyebrow at him. And of course, Steven Spielberg loves expressive faces and he loves to capture those. And so he just took that take of my, arched eyebrow turning toward the president. And people were Facebook messaging me about this moment before I'd even seen the movie. They're like, "Oh my God, the look you give." And I was like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?" I didn't tell anybody about my participation in this movie because I'd heard so many people talk about how they'd told everybody and their mother, "Oh my God, I'm in this movie," and then they get cut out of it. And that had famously happened with Mark Joy with Last of the Mohicans. Mm-hmm. He had been, his character had been completely cut out of the story. And, I just didn't want that to happen. And so to find out that I was in the movie. The line was in the movie. I feel like the line remained in the movie because it's an important plot point. So you're like, as long as you don't blow up that plot point, you know.
You see the movie.
You see the movie.
They have a title.
Yeah, the title says, you know, and eventually, you know, after the victory at Fort Fisher, you're like, what victory at Fort Fisher? You know, the guy was horrible. But it was such a wonderful experience, and he was so kind and also so. I mean, there's going to be people maybe listening to this that are filmmakers, aspiring filmmakers. The sense of possibility that he and the sense of ease and trust that permeated that whole set. I mean, obviously he's worked with the same people over and over again, and he's got sort of like a staff that he's really comfortable with, but at no point do you get the sense that you don't belong, or, you know, there's like this toxic urgency that's like, you know, he's not walking around like banging, you know, like Khrushchev, like his shoe on the table. It was just nice and easy. He'd done it a million times, and it was a wonderful experience. And it makes you go, you know, you spend time in the theater. We go to rehearsal and we rehearse something for a month, and then we do it, you know, a couple times a week, and then we put it to bed. It's just a different animal. But I don't envision myself like doing the Daniel Day-Lewis thing, like shutting off the electricity to my house or like whatever he did. But God love him. Hey man, whatever works, you know.
Did you see they're doing Goonies 2?
Yeah.
I think Spielberg's directing it.
Oh man, that's so cool. I mean,
is it gonna be them as adults? I have no idea.
I
Is
don't
it gonna
know.
be their kids? I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, but whatever he does, I'll watch. I mean, whatever he does.
I hope Corey Feldman's in it. That's all. I can say.
That would be so great.
He's had quite a third act of his life.
Who knows? Maybe it's a wonderful moment for him where you know he gets to, you know, to see like, Ki Hai Kwan in Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, I remember I was probably 11 years old when Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom came out, and I remember being like, you know, good-naturedly jealous that this kid gets this opportunity. But even then, I thought maybe I'll try and do this when I grow up, be an actor, and this kid's getting an opportunity to do it. And I would read all of the movie magazines and interviews with him, and hear sort of just how supportive and kind Steven Spielberg was to him as a kid in this giant undertaking. In
the jungle.
Yeah, and this and the money and the stakes and the.
And wasn't his wife?
His wife. Yeah, so his wife was actually
a whole nother layer.
Full disclosure: Kate Capshaw, my first crush.
Yeah,
she
from
was
that movie.
From that movie, and she was sitting in the control room around the corner. Like I saw her, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
That's interesting.
got like weak in the knees. I'm like, "Gee whiz, there's Kate Capshaw." Yeah.
All right, so let's make kind of a hard pivot, but
yeah,
what was your what inspired you to enlist?
Yeah.
What was the thought process there?
So when I was in like high school and college, I read all the Tom Clancy novels. Like I read The Hunt for Red October and Red Storm Rising and Patriot Games and stuff like that. But I also knew that my grandfather was a Marine, my uncle was a Marine, my great uncle Roddy was in the Navy, and he and my grandfather used to go at it back and forth. You know, there were a lot of folks in my family that had served, and I thought, and then there was this kid when I was at Wagner College. His name was Ron Cusimano. We called him Coos. Well, Coos was like maybe a year ahead of me in school. So Coos joined the Navy, and then Coos came back with his like dress blues, and we're like, oh my god, you know, we're like in a 50s movie or 40s or 50s movie, like, hey, gee, look at you, swell uniform. He's like, yeah, it's great, guys. You know, it's really great. I love the Navy. It's awesome. So I'm like, oh my god. So then I get all the brochures, the Navy brochures. I actually got a brochure in like 94, and there's actually video. I have a video of myself showing the brochure to the camera, being like, I might do this, you know. And for whatever reason, I graduated, and then went into, like, I moved right back to New York City and didn't take that route. But I always did wonder, what if? And I remember, like, the kind of groundswell of enlistment after September 11th, right? But at that point, I felt like I couldn't even get out of my own way in terms of, like I didn't stop drinking until 2003. So, and then in 2007 or 2008, I started being like, I'm going to start running again. So I started running marathons, and then I got involved with the SEAL team physical training. And so I was like getting up at 5:30 in the morning and going with those yahoos running around Richmond in the blue and yellow t-shirts at 5 a.m. And at a certain point, I went, okay, I'm like 34 years old. What's still out there that I haven't done yet? And I was like, I went and Googled, like, what's the enlistment age limit? And it was like 40. And I said, wait a minute. Then I found out about the Navy Reserve, where you could still serve and you could maintain your civilian career. So I was like, okay, well, let me investigate this as a possibility. So I made the decision and investigated it, and I was like, I'm going to do this. But there was a real sense of, like, saying to yourself, like, just go for it. Like, the interesting thing is when I shared it with a lot of people, that decision, there was a lot of positive. A lot of people were like, okay, that's surprising, but it also felt like, they'll talk about, like, when you hit a really good shot in golf, this little tuning fork goes off where it's like, bing, that's it. And there's that moment where you make a decision that feels just right for yourself, and the tuning fork goes off inside, and you're like, that's the right decision. And so I knew I was making the right decision for myself, and it just felt like something I had to do. And
this was 34, 35?
34, 35, 2008, 2009, and went into boot camp. I went in and enlisted. I had my college degree, but I wasn't going to put together a commissioning package and wait for like a year for it to either get accepted or rejected. I thought, I'm just going to go in, raise my right hand, become a Navy Reserve sailor on the enlisted side, and go through boot camp and go through A school. And so I go into boot camp at 34 years old with these kids that are like 17, 18 years old. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself was almost its own fun, it was this fun adventure. But because physically I was crushing it. I mean, I was like running like great times, and was like, I felt better physically than I did actually when I was 17 or 18. So, absolutely. So I felt physically prepared, and mentally I've gotten out of my own way a little bit. Like, I'd removed some habits that would take me out of the fight. And so they talk about, like, things coming when you're ready for them. And this came when I was ready for it. And I felt like I grabbed it, and it became a part of my life in a way that I am so glad that it came when it did. And so I've just met so many people. And the fun thing about being in show business and being in the military is that, like, everybody, both parts of your life, everybody really appreciates and wants to know more. Like, people in the military, they're like, "Oh my God, so you got to work on this movie, or you're doing a show, or you're in a play or something." And then the people who are in show business are like, "Tell me about what you do in the military." Oh my God! And so there's overlap, because now I cross-rated, which means I changed jobs in like 2016 into public affairs, which is telling the Navy story. So you've got the storytelling techniques and showmanship or whatever, and then you have these incredibly rich lives of people who are making a difference and sacrificing, and sometimes they don't think that their own story is, they're like, there's nothing extraordinary about me, and you're kind of there to go like, no, really, what you're doing is amazing, and I'm going to tell the story to the world. Mm-hmm. So we found some synergy, and my wife today, as we're recording this, she's the command ombudsman for our command, which means she's the neutral liaison between the command and the community and the families, and she does an incredible job of that. And like, it's just, it just keeps getting like more interesting. Life keeps getting more interesting. And so if there are people out there listening to this that are like, well, gee, I thought I might do this. Sometimes it's worth just kind of throwing caution to the wind and really diving in full bore. Because there were moments when I was in boot camp with these 17, 18-year-old kids, and I'm going, what am I doing? Right? But then you come out the other side of what you think is the really difficult part, and you're faced with even more challenges or whatever. But you look back and you go, wow, you've got a story, and you've got some experience that you otherwise wouldn't have if you didn't take the leap. And for some people, taking the leap is... it just means different things. Like I always thought of taking the leap as to being at a larger media market, and I was like, now we live in a media ecosystem where, though, you can succeed from anywhere. Like there's no barrier between you and your audience anymore. You don't have to wait for some TV executive to greenlight you. You can literally like create your own content, and it'll be right. And the delivery system is this tiny little thing. And so it's those people who adapt to that and leverage it to like showcase their storytelling abilities that I think those people are going to be creatively satisfied. And I don't know, maybe there'll be some money in it for once.
Well, that sort of brings me to my next question, which is, that is a big part of this podcast, not money, but as I say, how do you professionalize your passion? And I'm just curious how much of the calculation of going into the Navy Reserve was due to the fact that the career that we both chose was so financially difficult.
It wasn't initially much of a consideration in terms of financial, because as a reserve sailor, you were getting paid like one weekend a month for drilling and stuff. I just wanted that to be a part of my life, but the unique thing that ended up happening was when COVID hit and the bottom fell out of the industry, and there were no shows. I mean, you could always concert. You might not always be able to count on. You can never count on much of anything, but you could at least sort of fill your calendar with possible theater projects in a way that's a little bit more realistic than film or television or commercials. A lot of those things jump up, and you've got to be ready to capture them. So if you're sort of like organizational and thinking forward, you're like, okay, I booked this and I booked this and I booked this, and maybe I do a concert as Mr. Showtime and that sort of thing. All those gigs got wiped out, and I could hear my dad's voice in the back of my head going, have something to fall back on. And the thing that was there for me to fall back on was actually something that I really cared about. So I think so many times a lot of us think of that fallback choices, either it's selling out or not being all in with your dreams or whatever, but really the reality of it is leveraging something that you're already passionate about into maybe a career or a part-time side hustle that is still fulfilling and rewarding and challenging, but maybe is not exactly what you're... So it's almost like having a major and a minor. So you're like, yeah, I majored in acting, but I would minor in journalism or something like that. To pick two careers that pay nothing. But
yeah, journalism is a great
right,
choice.
Yeah, it's a great choice. I wanted to be like the next Pete Hamill or Jimmy Breslin or like Ring Lardner or like a sports journalist or something like that. But the idea now at 50, I'm 51 now. If I would go back and change things, I may set up a situation where I would get a more steady gig during the day and save my pennies for when I really needed them. Or, not a lot of companies now are offering like a full vested retirement either. So that some of these things that we're talking about that you will hear people from different generations talk to you about, make sure you have a solid career. Well, nothing is solid anymore. There's
people don't know what a pension is
right,
anymore.
A pension. What the heck is a pension?
It doesn't even exist.
So it's important for you to but find something. It's going to sound new agey and touchy feely, but you have to find things where the tuning fork goes off in your inside and you go, that's right for me. That's right for me. job is right for me during the day while I work on my screenplay at night, or whether I work on my music at night. But conscious of the fact that, if you at least keep the lights on, keep your fridge stocked, and, keep gas in your tank, which is increasingly, more difficult to do, just create the conditions for you to have a room in your house or your apartment that's dedicated to whatever you're passionate about. And then if you want, if you want to write screenplays, or if you want to write plays, or if you want to be Mr. Showtime, if you want to create an evening of jazz standards with a lot of corny Catskills types jokes, like, you can, I'm a living proof. But like, it is possible to do those things. And I think maybe that's the Pollyanna version of it, but really secure, like finding some kind of secure something that allows you to make your artwork.
And to have that feeling that you talk about when you went into that audition, or you had the $2,000 check waiting for you. That's sort of what happens is, and this has happened to me several times in my career with acting, is the moment I stop pursuing it as a profession, opportunities just start flying.
That's when they want you, man. I saw this, we see so many things, if our algorithm is sort of like catching us correctly. I saw like a reel come by about Joe Pesci and his experience with Raging Bull. Like, he was working at a restaurant in New York City. Like, he had given acting up, and he'd already, sort of said, is that dating thing. It's like, if you don't want them, they're going to come after you. And he was like, he'd kind of given it up. And then Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese come after him to say, like, no, you'd be perfect for this thing. And even after they expressed interest, he's like, nah, you should give this to somebody who's going to, maybe somebody up and coming who's going to have a longer career. And like, they still had to convince him, which is interesting. And it's like, but I think a lot of that comes from whether you're in an audition situation or not, like just knowing who you are. Like really knowing who you are, and not bending over backwards to be like, love me and need me and make me feel validated. You got to come in the room with that self-worth already, because that's interesting. It gets really interesting.
Spivey said something that's similar, but on a different side of the coin, which is knowing also what type you are.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Especially like after you've gotten out of college and high school, where you're playing whatever.
Oh man.
And there are exceptions, like you playing the old man. Lord knows Spivey's played his fair share.
Oh
of
my
old
God,
men.
Spivey was like he was the old man, and lots of shows in school and stuff like that. But he's as a character actor like we are, when you're reading, you already know you're a character actor in junior high when they're like, you're the grandpa, and you're like, okay, and you relish it. That's
honestly, it's an advantage.
It's an advantage, because eventually you grow into that.
Yes.
Like I got cast in a role for which I am now age appropriate. That's going to happen in March, and it's a wonderful, meaty musical theater role, and I'm like, okay, I'm heading into that era of my life, which is wonderful because there's a whole catalog of characters that exist along that. And so, who knows? I may be in my salad days, Paulson.
You going to say what that show is?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? Watch this space. But yeah, you got to just know who you are. You just have to spend time with yourself and spend time with your passions and know what you don't want. And I don't know. I mean, a lot of this stuff I'll say in an interview situation, it's really for me, It's not like I have it all figured out. I still go into an audition situation going, God, I hope they love me, or I hope, because there's always this sense of you're searching for approval. There's some thing where you want people to be impressed with something but everybody brings something different to the table. And, so just, it's like you just have to have a full inner life and find those things that sustain you through the times that are lean, when no one's answering the phone and you're not being cast and your headshot and resume is going into the circular file, as my dad would say. It's just like you have to be like, well, I enjoy this music, or I'm really deeply involved in a good book, or I'm writing my own story, or making my own music. Like, that stuff will sustain you until I think of a thing like Lincoln, right? I think in these visual terms, like this big giant DreamWorks movie comes by, and it is like what I call the SS Showbiz. So it's this big giant, aircraft carrier type of thing, and I'm in this little rowboat. I'm in this little rowboat with my whole life and all the things and my bag of tricks and all the stuff and I'm just rowing along, and the SS Showbiz comes by, and it goes, "Sir, get out of the boat," and they pull you up. They pull you up, and the food is amazing, and there's all this stuff, but you don't spend time on the SS Showbiz. Like, you eventually have to, walk down the brow back to your own little boat, and you got to row your little boat and watch the SS Showbiz go over the horizon, and maybe it comes back someday, and maybe they'll provide a stateroom for you on it one of these days for a couple weeks. But the SS Showbiz is not, like, nobody stays on the damn boat forever. It just goes over the horizon. It's just like, what is in your little rowboat that sustains you? That means, like, you don't need the SS Showbiz to come back. You just have enough. You've got enough. You got a fishing pole, and you got enough to, like, sustain yourself creatively and dynamically and realistically. You just have to be able to shut the light off at the end of the day and know that you gave it your best shot, and that you have a life that is rewarding for you and the people around you. Because if you're miserable that the SS Showbiz didn't come back, so it's developing this gratitude mindset, and you'll appreciate those moments when it comes back over the horizon and goes, one more thing, you're brilliant, we need you again.
Well, we usually end the podcast with asking for advice. I feel like you just gave a bunch. I don't want to ask you to repeat anything. Is there anything else you want to add?
I just would say that it is a very difficult road. And so all of those things that we talk about in terms of, like, giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves, a full inner life, it's also important to be encouraging and to be kind to the people who are also trying to do the same thing, because it's just a hard road to, like, you're really hacking out a new road where there isn't one. Every time you are like, I'm gonna make a career in the arts, like, you're taking a machete and hacking through this, and trying to forge your own path. So it's hard enough. It's hard enough to do without having to suffer jerks and naysayers. So I just try to be the person who is, maybe if you're in a position to, like, facilitate a connection between somebody who might need it, or even just be encouraging with your time, or your even just the good vibes, Sometimes just telling people how much you appreciate what they do. People don't hear it a lot, and so it's just important to be a kind and supportive person, because we're not here forever. Like, we're just not. I mean, I've seen, we've had a couple people in the last couple weeks taken away before their journey was, supposed to end. We don't know how much time we have, so I think it's important to be kind and be friendly and cheerful and lift each other up.
That's a perfect way to end. Scott Wichmann, thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Love you, man.
Love you too, bud.